and adhere to the professional principles necessarily, and we think that it should be the same for both.
So do you therefore believe that the regulation in terms of traditional firms is less robust than for licensed legal service providers?
I don't think we're necessarily saying it's less robust, and one of the clear issues for us is the changes that are to be made to the governance of the Law Society, which we very much support. It's something that we've said should happen for a very long time, although we do have an issue about the percentage of lay members on the Law Society's council. So as far as that's concerned, we're absolutely happy with that. All we're saying is that if we're moving towards a more modern system, more modern legal system, that all providers should be subject to the same requirements, and that at the moment, as it stands, the regulatory objectives do not necessarily apply to traditional providers.
Ms Farmer, have you got any comments on that?
Not terribly much more to add, except that we would like to see exactly the same regulation applying across the board. We don't have any great criticism at the moment of the existing regulation.
Just in terms of the complexity of regulation, obviously in terms of a user of legal services, pursuing a complaint, you want to try and ensure that it's as simple as possible, so that people are able to take complaints forward, if they have issues. Do you think the bill serves that purpose? Do you think the regulation is too complex?
Not terribly clear, and I think it would have to be clarified, it would have to be clearer, and it would have to be a simpler system for the complaints process.
I think it's absolutely essential that it's as clear and simple as possible for those who use it, and that's one of the reasons why it's important that we do have the same regulation regardless of who's providing the service. So I think that's absolutely key for us. I think one of the issues we have raised as a concern is the addition of a new form of complaint, regulatory complaint, which means that there's now an additional category of complaint for people to find their way through, and we are quite concerned about that that's going to make it more complicated, and so it's absolutely essential that information for consumers is as clear as possible about what they should do. I mean, when they're actually receiving the service, it shouldn't matter to them who's providing it, but they do need to know what road they should go down if they do have a problem.
Thank you. Nigel Dodd.
Very much, Convener, and good morning, ladies. I'm just wondering if you could try and tell me what benefits there would be in opening up legal services in such a way that advocates can participate in alternative business structures, please. It's not at all clear to me quite what the benefit really is of that.
Again, it's difficult to see what the benefits would be without knowing what kind of structures would grow up. We certainly know that there are advocates out there who would like to be able to form alternative ways of doing business, and we certainly think that there's a very strong argument that it should be, those restrictions should be lifted. It's less of a pressing issue for us than solicitors, because few members of the public actually deal with advocates, but we do think that those restrictions should be lifted, because we don't know what kind of structures there are out there that could be formed.
Again, very much the same answer. It's actually quite unclear as to what is being proposed in terms of advocates, apart from actually lifting the restrictions, and how that would be taken forward. So I think it's quite difficult to comment in any great detail on that.
I'm just wondering if I could take Ms O'Neill back to her submission, and paragraph 24 of it says, and I'll read it for the moment, we believe that all restrictions on competition should be removed unless there are clear and justifiable reasons for retaining them. We are not convinced that there is sufficient justification for retaining the current restrictions on advocates participating in ABSs. Given that there are something like 440 advocates in Scotland, given that they deal with every case in principle that comes before them, I'm just completely unclear as to how you can improve the competitiveness of that market by changing the structure. I'm really just looking for some help to see how on earth. I appreciate that advocates might want, for example, to work in partnerships for their own business reasons, but even that would actually restrict competition.
Oh, I mean, we're not necessarily convinced that that's the case. I mean, first of all, I think it's important to make the point, as others have, that this is permissive. We're not saying advocates have to do this, we're saying they should be allowed to do it if they so wish. And we're not entirely convinced that it would actually lead to competition issues. If it did, then clearly the Office of Fair Trading could step in, would have a role there. But there seems to be an assumption, which I can't quite understand, that advocates who work in the same area of work would band together. And that's not what generally happens with solicitors' firms, so I'm not entirely sure why that would be the case. And I know that's often the argument that's used, is if all the advocates that work in this area band together, then it's going to be difficult for the other side in a case to actually get representation. It seems to me that what they might want to do is actually band together and form a practice of advocates who do different areas of work, or they may want to form practices with solicitors. So it's possible that that might be a route that some would want to go down.
Yep, okay, I would entirely accept that, but can you explain to me how that actually works in the consumer's interests? Because all that does is reduce the number of parties who might be able to represent you. Surely that reduces competition by definition.
Well, I think what I'm saying is I'm not sure it does necessarily reduce the number of parties who can represent you. I mean, it may actually make it easier for consumers to get access to the advocate that they need. It may be that it will actually lead to reduced prices for them. It would actually lead to a more consumer-focused service, I think, if we had the possibility that advocates could have those structures.
I'm going to press you because I think it's important and the advocates really want to know a reason to this. I don't disagree with all that you've said, which is what a lot of witnesses have said to us, which I have perhaps slightly unfairly described as sort of elementary economics. We all, I think, around this table understand the basic principle of competition, maybe reducing prices. But I'm still struggling in the particular case of advocates. I'm not talking about solicitors or accountants here. I'm talking about the particular issue of advocates to see how any other mechanism than requiring them to operate independently actually increases competition.
Well, I mean, all I can say is repeat what I've said, that we don't actually know what there would be, because at the moment these kind of arrangements aren't allowed, and we would like to see what might develop. And as I said, the Office of Fair Trading has a clear role if there are competition issues that arise from that.
Thank you. We'll now be passed to issues of outside ownership and governance with Cathy Craigie.
Thank you, Convener. This question would be primarily for Consumer Focus Scotland. In the written submission to the committee, the Consumer Focus Scotland remind us that their work is to secure a fair deal for consumers in both private and public markets. And they're going to say that while producers of goods are usually of goods and services are usually well organised and articulate when protecting their own interest, individuals, consumers are very often are not, and totally agree with that point and the aims of the organisation. But can you tell us what are the risks and the benefits associated with opening up the legal services market in Scotland to banks and supermarkets and other individuals who might want to invest?
Okay, well, I mean, I think I've already outlined what we see the benefits as, and I think, I mean, I have focused very much on advice agencies, voluntary sector and so on, but we do see potential advantages in other providers coming into the market, because, you know, I mean, things like, you know, I've said reduced prices, etc., but there are things like greater convenience, perhaps, if services can be provided at times that actually suit people better, that, you know, other providers may be very consumer focused. They're concerned about their brand, and consumers trust those brands. I mean, there are lots of other potential things that could happen, as we've said. I think there are clearly risks that come along with that, but I think it's important to point out that, you know, whatever we've heard about the increasing marketisation of legal services, that is already happening. And I think that's one of the main reasons for actually introducing this bill, is that the legal services market is already changing, and we need to modernise the system so that we can keep up with that we do have alternative providers coming into the market at the moment, and that will continue to happen, particularly if we see these reforms in England and Wales and we're seeing elsewhere in Europe. I think, you know, in terms of supermarkets, consumers like supermarkets. We know that they have much greater choice than they had in the past, a much greater selection of goods. more convenient opening hours, all of these things. Whether supermarkets will actually want to do this is another question. I mean, Tesco Law is the name that's being bandied about, but we're not entirely sure that lots of supermarkets actually want to do this. And the point's been made that they will do work that's profitable. And I would question what that actually is, because, you know, conveyancing is the market that we found in the research working group to be one of the most competitive. So I'm not entirely convinced there's an awful lot of potential profit in there for supermarkets and banks and others.
But, can I ask again, though, your written submission talks about all the benefits, the increased costs, reduced prices, better access, more consumer-focused services, greater convenience,